What is the benefit of using / knowing astrology when it comes to healing the body? And we may have touched on some of this, but
Yeah. Well, on a core level, like I mentioned, you can really get to the like core of a person's elemental makeup through their astrology chart. You can kind of guess, and there's other methods. Different branches of medicine have like pulse diagnosis or tongue diagnosis. Or so with astrology, to me, it's like you're getting the user's manual for the person's body and their soul and their spirit. It's like, oh, here's the user manual. And in and of itself, you could get lost in that map, but it's like I think like with like health and healing, like I do hands-on healing touch and like working with like helping people with herbs, like, hey, try this tea or try working with this plant essence. It's like you're then getting under the hood of the car, because it's like, I don't think just taking the map, like you can get a lot from just the map on a psychological level and on a spiritual level, but then on like a physical level, that's where like the other tools come in. So I think it's a great map for then knowing, well, which tool do I use? Like what plant do I use? Because there's a million plants, as you ladies probably know, for like inflammation. But then to narrow it down and be like, well, this person has a lot of fire in their chart. Would turmeric really be anti-inflammatory for this person, or is that going to aggravate the fire in them? So it helps you really, like, I feel like just kind of get in there and do like surgery of like, this plant is going to be great for this condition, because you can understand the root of an issue through like what's happening to that planet that's representing maybe the illness or the organ that's out of balance. And then you're like, okay, here's the remedy. And usually it's antipathy. So sometimes in homeopathy, though, you use the same elemental, but a lot of the time it's like, hey, if there's a lot of fire, maybe we want to bring in a more watery plant that will like moisten and help the person's inflammation that way, knowing that they're really fiery. They have a really fiery digestion, as an example.
I guess, I mean, that's got to be, I mean, it is super multifold, because you've got the constitution of the individual as the chart is showing you, possibly then, how that's manifesting symptom-wise in an illness, which I would assume also is then relating to the specific time and place that they're at when they have the illness. So like,
totally.
Just on a very base level, maybe I'm assuming you might treat a common cold that happens in the spring or summer differently than you might treat a common cold that's happening in the winter, not just because of the season, but because of what's going on on that bigger scale. Even like, it might be the same person, so there might be some overlap in things you would recommend, but the timing, I would assume, comes into play too.
Yeah, like the timing, sometimes you'll see like a transit might trigger an illness. Like maybe a person has a certain predisposition in the chart, and maybe it's fine for a while, but maybe there's a certain stressful transit to that planet that maybe triggers like, oh, all of a sudden I'm having this weird kind of symptom. It'll then kind of like highlight it. So sometimes that's where I think the timing of it plays in, where you can be like, oh, that kind of makes sense that this is expressing right now because you have this stressful aspect to this planet. And then it also kind of gives a little bit of peace of mind too, because then you're like, well, see if this doesn't get better, by the time this planet moves out of this sign. Like, and so you can kind of highlight areas where you might, periods of time where you might be more vulnerable. Like, for instance, to give a kind of crazy morbid example, my current partner actually like lost part of his finger before I ever met him. In a kind of a freak accident. And when I looked back at the transits he was going through, it was like a classic accident prone transit. And, we can get deep in the rabbit hole of if he had known, would it have really stopped it? I mean, but I do think that knowledge is power. And so it was interesting. This particular transit, I think it was Saturn squaring his natal Uranus. Or no, sorry, Mars squaring his natal Uranus. And that's like a very classic, like any hard aspect of Mars to Uranus, conjunction, square, opposition, could be like a more accident prone time. And it was also during an eclipse when it happened, which was like even more kind of ominous. So that's like kind of a morbid example. And I don't want to harp on like the negative, But in a positive light, you can then look at the chart and be like, okay, these are organ systems we want to strengthen in you, you know? And as an herbalist, I feel like it's always about, ideally, right? It's preventative before it gets to like the acute point of like, you need to go get an antibiotic or something.
Yeah.
It's really cool because like when you look back and study this stuff, Hippocrates, like all the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath. He has like a famous quote where he said that he who practices medicine without understanding astrology is not a doctor, but a fool. So it was very, very like important. And many of these ancient, like Paracelsus, he was like the father of like modern herbalism. He was also an astrologer. So it's like a lot of these people, they knew both, got that kind of holistic view of the person. So you're not as blindly just trying to like willy-nilly throw things at a symptom.
It's funny how that quote does not get repeated a lot these days.